Hello and welcome to the Body Resilient Mum podcast. I'm your host, Louise Hurley, and I am here to elevate your body image one conversation at a time. Most of us have grown up believing that a thinner, smoother, tighter body and face is better. And if we have these things, then we have succeeded and will live happily ever after. When we've been surrounded by this message all of our lives, in some form or other, we tend not to question it. It's just the way of the world. But have you ever stopped to wonder whether these standards that we've been holding ourselves to are even possible to achieve? And if we do try to match these standards, like losing weight or trying to remain wrinkle and dimple free, is it actually healthy? As mums, we feel under so much pressure to succeed in all areas of life, including trying not to look like we've grown and birthed a tiny human. This podcast will encourage you to challenge your long-term beliefs about what your body should look like and help you to move from a place of conflict with your body to a place of peace and acceptance. Welcome to the Body Resilient Mum podcast. This is our first episode this year, and I'm super excited to be joined by Gina Stear. Gina is a dietitian and nutritionist. Now, she has been a dietitian for over 25 years and has worked within specialised paediatric and maternity hospitals for over 10 years, as well as private practice and government settings in the UK, South Africa, and Australia. Gina started Simple Steps Nutrition to help mums nourish themselves and their little ones through every age and stage. She's dedicated to laying the foundations for lifelong health, from pre-pregnancy nutrition to postnatal replenishment for mums. She believes in keeping things simple, practical, and affordable, tailoring her approach to fit each person and family's unique needs. Oh my God, Gina, where have you been all of our lives? How wonderful is that? I love your approach.
Thanks so much, Louise. When you asked me to speak today, I thought it was quite funny that you're asking a dietitian to speak about diet culture. And so often I think our profession, just starting with the word diet in front of it, is somehow synonymous with putting people on diets, etc. But I think I speak for myself and probably for most dietitians that I know, that's not what we do. We're far more around inclusion and focusing on variety and quality. And I think for me, living in the world we live in as a nutrition scientist and someone who has dedicated a lot of her profession to understanding nutrition, it's amazing just how much noise there is around what we should, or rather what we shouldn't eat, what we can't eat. And I guess for me, what's super important is helping to silence that noise, really pare it back, go back to what does the science say, what do we know, and helping with a non-diet approach for mums to know, well, what does that mean in practice? Yeah, so how can I help nourish my child plus have a healthy relationship with food, and offer them enjoyment and do it in a sustainable way? That is something that we can put into practice regardless of whether it's the weekend or the week or a busy night. So that's just, I think, for me, so important. And really wanting to try and give some of that clarity amongst
And
the noise.
your business name sums it up beautifully, like Simple Steps. And yeah, there's so much noise, social media, everywhere. It's all about don't eat this, this is toxic, this is poison. It's like, where do you get this advice from then? Where should I be getting this advice from? And here you are.
Oh, and I guess, that's part of bad news sells, maybe, or the more dramatic or the more
Yeah.
catastrophic something seems, it might kind of be more focused on. Unfortunately, there is a lot of that is kind of spread through social media, through the media. And it can be quite tricky. And I think for any mum, it's very difficult to kind of know, well, what does that mean in reality?
Yeah, 100%. So Gina, what is, because we've talked about, like where you're coming from, what you're passionate about, and what your qualifications are amongst the noise that is going on. What is the difference between a dietitian accreditation and a nutritionist accreditation? And I ask this because, well, one, because it's very interesting and I don't know the answer. And two, there's a lot of people out there who call themselves nutritionists. And so what is the difference? Could you clear that up for us?
Yeah, of course. So a dietitian has obtained generally a minimum of a 3 to 4 year degree at a university that has got an accredited course. We are, as a profession, regulated. So a bit like doctors and other allied health professionals, we have a regulatory body, Dietitians Australia. So once we qualify, we then have to abide and follow those really strict standards and codes of conduct and ethics when it comes to the type of work that we practice. So nutritionists, on the other hand, you do get accredited nutritionists as well who have followed a rigorous qualification process and journey. However, it's not a regulated profession. And so you can have someone who might have just an interest in nutrition and they may have done a 3-week course reading up on a few things and they are able to call themselves a nutritionist.
Right.
So I guess in a nutshell, all dietitians are nutritionists, but not all nutritionists are dietitians.
Mm-hmm.
We are the only nutrition science professionals that are acknowledged through Medicare, private health, NDIS. So we are also the only ones that can work in a more clinical setting. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in hospitals and helping to treat disease conditions with food and nutrition.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. That makes
Does
so
that
much
does
sense.
that kind of answer?
Yes. Yes, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Um, and how we've touched upon already that you're a busy mum and you get it. Like you need to keep things affordable. You need to keep things simple for your kids, for yourself. How did you get into working with mums, children, pregnant ladies? How did you fall into that?
It was probably by accident originally when I got my first job. um, but I think, yeah, really interesting for me is the more I have worked in this space, the more I've realized that this is where I can make a really big difference because nutrition is such an impactful part of a mom's health and well-being, and then obviously that of her child as well. And so working in hospitals and pediatric hospitals and neonatal ICUs, burns units, pediatric burns units, I think the thing for me was always so powerful that if you didn't get the nutrition right, nothing else actually started changing. So, you know, a very sick child, you really knew that they were starting to improve. Infections were coming under control once you could get that nutrition right. It's also that thing that I think is so powerful for any parent. So, you know, again, talking more from my clinical years, you know, when you work in, and I know you had a prem baby too, so you would know that too. But for any parent, it's such a built-in need to be able to nourish and nurture your child. And so when you are given that opportunity to do that in, you know, really simple ways, but can see that reward, it's a very powerful thing for any parent to be able to do that. So yeah, I think, you know, seeing what good nutrition could do, not just for a sick child, but then also for a parent who, in a medical space, when there's very little that they can control, they can help with the nutrition. And I think that's wonderful for any parent to have that.
You're right. That's so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just ended up loving it.
I love that. And yeah, and once you feel like, no, this is my calling, like this is my niche, it just clicks, doesn't it? And you're like, yes, this is what I was meant to do. I get this.
Yeah, and I think then when you become a mum, it kind of opens up this whole other world, because you start the journey thinking, well, I've got knowledge, I've got basic knowledge, and then you just are so far removed from that reality check, and so trying to kind of understand, okay, well, how do I actually put that into really practical things where I know the science, I know the what it should be, but that doesn't always translate into what it is, you know.
That makes me feel so much better knowing that the professional in diet and, nutrition would also maybe find it difficult to get their kids to eat bloody broccoli.
Totally, totally. And I think, I think we've just got to, things have to be real. We've got to kind of put it into that real context,
Mm,
because otherwise it's just not sustainable.
yeah.
Um, so that's, I guess, how I got to it, and that's why I love working in this space, because I think there is just so much we can do to help one another,
Mm,
um, and learn from one another.
yeah. Absolutely. And as mums as well, we focus so much on our children's nutrition. You're right, like we want to nourish them because it's part of looking after our children. And obviously no one goes into motherhood going, I'm going to be a shit mum. Like everyone wants to be the best. You want to be the best mum possible. And if you can do that through nutrition, amazing. Even if it's just to, they get breakfast every morning, great, you've done a good job. We neglect ourselves very often as a mum. So much focus goes into feeding our children well. The amount of mums I speak to, it's like, well, how did you fuel your body at dinner time? What did you have? It's like, oh, some of the kids' leftovers. This is someone I spoke to. I'll pick up the kids' leftovers and then I'll have some crackers. Like, where was your nutrition? When are you fueling your body? And they're like, I don't. Is that something you come across?
All the time. um, I think, yeah, I really am quite passionate about this need to try and support mum, because there is no doubt that, pregnancy puts a huge burden on your body from a nutritional perspective, because we know that the baby will take everything it needs in order to grow, optimally. Um, and so, for mums going into pregnancy, that puts already a huge strain on their body. If we haven't really supported them appropriately, and we can talk about that in a little while, just in terms of where mums are tracking,
Mm,
but it means that, when they leave that pregnant phase and in the postpartum phase, they often are more depleted than when they started. And
mm,
so, yeah, I hear that all the time. Mums are amazing at putting these perfect meals and snack combinations together for their kids, and they just forget to feed themselves.
yeah.
And yeah, I think I I really live by the analogy. I don't know if you know the oxygen mask analogy, but
Yeah.
when you getting that safety briefing on a plane, they always say, well, always put your oxygen mask on first before you help the person next to you. And and I think for me that's so important for a mum to remember. Like, if you are nourishing and feeding yourself, you will be in a better place to be able to look after and feed your little one too.
Mm,
So it is so important.
yeah. And then we talk about that like it's, like you can go, "Oh, okay, yes, I need to feed myself better." And yet we live in a world, like for decades and decades, we've lived within diet culture. And this is kind of a hot topic on across all social media platforms and, all the body positivity accounts will talk about diet culture. But it's so ingrained in us, isn't it, that health equals weight loss, thinness, kind of not eating much or following certain diet rules in order to be healthy. We're talking about mums looking after themselves, putting themselves first when it comes to nutrition, being a better mum, and yet trying to do all this within diet culture. I mean, how do you feel that growing up within diet culture, I wonder how many times I can say diet culture in this interview. Growing up within diet culture, how does that affect nourishing our bodies as mums?
Well, where do I start? I think for me, yeah, it's a generational thing.
Mhm.
I grew up with it. I'm sure you
Yeah,
did
me too.
too. And it's been this focus on restricting, rewarding, for restricting,
Mhm.
removing, focusing on deficit. And unfortunately, I think when we follow this way of being, we neglect, we focus on the weight, we focus on that aspect, and we
Mm,
forget about nutrition. So, I mean, I think for you as well, it's important, well, for everyone listening, it's important to remember that this is also the weight loss industry in Australia is a $500 million
yeah.
industry, right? And that's
It's
just
huge.
around losing weight and dieting. That
Mm,
doesn't even account for food products and supplements that promise
mm,
to have additional health benefits. So we are fed so much of this information to be, social media doesn't help, but media has been doing it for a long time. And, products, health fads contributing to, or supposedly contributing to this ideal of thinness,
mm,
and having to look a certain way, which is completely unattainable and unrealistic.
mm,
And so, why I don't like it, why I don't like diet culture, um, well, first of all, it does encourage a bad relationship with food. Um, we know this. There's a lot of research now to support that. Um, as I said before, it really just focuses on this ideal of thinness rather than understanding, well, what does that mean for your health?
mm,
Um, it labels foods. So, we end up characterizing food as good or bad, or things that I can't have, and you suddenly then are made to feel guilty because you may have eaten something that suddenly you would have been quite fine to eat in a balanced space, but we start giving these um, labels to foods. And the thing about the diet culture is that it also encourages like hyper control around eating and food. So we're always encouraged to eat less, count calories. If you don't get it right, well, you just got to try harder. Um, and so, we again forget about, well, what is this focus on these numbers and this weight? We lose sight of health and what health should look like. And the other thing is it promises a quick fix. So I'm thinking
mm,
as humans, we do like to know that something is able to be fixed quickly. um, and as a society, I guess that's probably what fuels this whole faddish
mm,
way of
100%.
looking at food. Um, but unfortunately, when that is done, it usually translates to drastic measures to get there. So,
Mm,
removing usually whole food groups, or always eliminating something to the extreme. And we know that that's not sustainable. And usually it then ends up that person goes into that vicious yo-yo cycle
mm,
of um, losing weight but feeling denuded, lacking in something. um, it usually promotes cravings, and then you can't sustain it because life takes over. in that whole process, weight then creeps in, and you have that feeling of failure, and that you actually have to start over and find another option. And
Yeah,
I
fine.
think, that's the danger of this whole very unrealistic diet culture.
Mm. Oh, just hearing all that makes me want to cry. I'm like, yes, I see it so often. And actually thinking back to when I was a teen and probably early 20s, I'm like, yes, like I have been there.
Yeah,
And what strikes me in what you were saying is that there's actually not one body shape, one type that is healthy. Like we need to
no,
start moving away from that, thinking that thin automatically equals healthy.
yeah.
And there is a point, isn't there, where someone could be so overweight, you're like, okay, so there's probably other things you need to work on, like cardiovascular health, reducing your cholesterol, and other things. But I feel like all of that can be done without even considering how much your body weighs and trying to look a certain way.
Absolutely. And I think, you hit the nail on the head to say that we all are different in terms of our body composition,
Mm,
our body makeup, our body size, our genetics. Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Um, and so, for that reason, even around this whole diet culture of the idea that there might be only one way of eating that's going to suddenly change how you are and how you look is just ridiculous,
Mm,
for that exact reason. And if we look at what happens in our bodies when we do go into this kind of restrictive way of eating, um, your body actually changes. So we've got the body is such an amazing thing, and we've got this ability to go into almost like survival mode. So when you starve your body of nutrients and
mm,
nutrition, your body kicks into the survival mode so that you can survive despite deficits in energy and nutrition, etc. And unfortunately, what that mechanism does is it tends to increase lots of other things as well. So you have an increase in hunger,
mm,
and as a result, an increase in cravings. And at the same time, your metabolism slows down because you're not getting the fuel to
yeah.
keep you going, at the pace that you're hoping to keep going. So your body just sort of kicks into this other mode, and that's usually why we then get into this terrible cycle of not being able to sustain these highly restrictive ways of eating.
Mm,
And it does nothing for our self-worth and our self-esteem. Um, and so if we look at, there's so much research as well, Louise, around giving us that backing now to say that it doesn't work. If we look at, and maybe that's what's different with the generation now, we've actually got the science now to
yeah.
show and prove that this approach doesn't work in the long term. So looking at when we talk about big, systematic reviews, and looking at the what does this summary of all the research say for us, we know that in the long term, this dieting culture leads to really minuscule reductions in the long
Mm,
term of so-called weight. Um, in fact, it has the opposite impact. We usually see weight gain and
mm,
weight cycling, which is
yeah.
very dangerous. Um, it contributes to distorted body image and disordered eating. So, you know, what do I mean by disordered eating? Well, it's not an eating disorder, but it usually is when someone starts practicing unhealthy eating patterns. And so this can include restrictive dieting or more compulsive eating, skipping meals.
Mm,
And that tends to contribute to poorer mental health, poorer physical health. And ultimately, it can lead to eating disorders.
yeah.
But it is one of those things that we have to be really mindful of in that um, ideal of trying to be healthy.
Mm. And what we have now, I found, is that disordered eating has many different names and it can be disguised as fasting.
Hmm.
And then you've got people who are citing so called research papers, or say so called research papers, maybe misinterpreting the data in research papers on the benefits of fasting and what fasting actually is. And so you might not think that your eating or your eating habits are harmful because you think it's backed up in science, and actually it's not. It's disordered eating when you're skipping meals because you're trying to stick to rules, or eating windows and timings, and
Mm.
mm,
Absolutely. I
it's
mean, I think, you know, there's also this around the ideal of thinness and weight loss being that focus. Um, there is that misconception as well that, and this is kind of years gone by in terms of public health messaging as well, and diet and fitness industry, that in order to motivate someone for healthier to practice healthier behaviors, we actually need to make them feel bad about their bodies, and we need
mm,
to focus on weight,
yeah.
right? And what we now know is that is the complete opposite in terms of the impact that it has on people pursuing and actually achieving greater health for themselves. Um, and yeah, I guess this kind of brings me to the whole thing around focusing on numbers,
Mm,
and focusing on those things that might be really poor um, reflectors or indicators of health. So, weight is one of them. Um, focusing on your weight as a number, and what
mm,
does that mean? Because as you said as well, you know, it is just a number,
mm,
but somehow we put so much value on that number.
yeah, yeah.
BMI.
Oh,
So what
yeah.
is BMI? Like it, unfortunately, it is that thing that is given so much value,
Mhm.
and when we look at BMI, it's very flawed in assessing individual
It
health
is.
risk.
Yeah, and it
It
was never
was
designed, was it, to be
never
used
meant for
on
that. It was
individuals?
for population-based studies. It does not consider our body composition. It doesn't look at your bone mass, muscle mass, fat
Mm,
percentage, maybe where that is the distribution of your where your muscle and fat lies. So it gives us very little in terms of guiding us in terms of health
mm,
indicators. Um, and actually, so much so that last year, the American Medical Association, they adopted a whole new policy where they are advocating for doctors to de-emphasize the use of BMI in practice, because of its huge limitations in measuring health
mm,
and the dangers in focusing on that and what it actually ultimately means for people. Um, and that when we do focus on weight and when we do focus on BMI, um, we know now that people end up developing poor body image and negative body image associations. Um, and that in itself means that they can be more predisposed to anxiety and depression, weight stigma, and generally a self-loathing, which is something that
mhm.
we really don't want, because we know that when you don't appreciate your body,
Yeah,
you often don't do anything to look after it.
yeah. And then you've got, in mums, you've got everything that you've just said, and underlying that is a whole new, almost a whole new body. Your body has changed drastically because you've
Drastically.
grown a baby, birthed a baby. You're now trying to look after a baby, and your lifestyle is very different. So you've got that underlying everything that you've just said. What a mental war you could be at yourself, with yourself. You can absolutely be in two minds of, oh my God, I'm in awe of my body. And yet, society, some medical professionals are telling me my body is not good enough now, that it's
Yeah.
flawed because of its size, weight, BMI.
And it is really, it's frustrating because we know that the hormonal shifts that happen with birth are probably the largest that a woman will experience in her entire lifetime.
Mm,
And it takes usually 12 months in that postpartum period for a body to repair,
mm,
and for things to start normalizing. Yet,
mm-hmm.
we see so much that gets when you're pregnant, or you start looking at things on social media, suddenly you get fed this
Yeah.
plethora of information, and suddenly the images of getting back to your pre-pregnancy weight or the
Oh,
perfect body within 6 weeks. It's really damaging, because it's not allowing moms to actually focus on what's important, and that's in developing that bond with their little one, and that healthy connection around
mm.
feeding their little one as well, which is such a powerful um, innate need for any mom to be able to do.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I love then you didn't say anything about I hate this term. It's really hard to even say it, bounce back. You said it's about reconnecting and, replenishing and healing. And I love that rather than bouncing back because so many celebrities and influencers, they're praised on bouncing back. And whether it's, 6 weeks after or 6 months after, it's always, the praise is always around how they look. And it's never about how they've fueled their body, how they've managed to feed their own baby, how they've done all this other amazing stuff. It's always based on she can fit into a pre-pregnancy jeans, or she can, it's all about size and weight and shape rather than what your body actually does.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, it's it's important that we don't lose sight of how amazing the body is,
Mm.
in having nurtured this baby for 9 months, grown a new person, a little
Mm.
person,
Yeah.
um, and then what you are able to do after that. I mean, just the resilience of mums in terms of falling into the space of sleep deprivation,
Mm.
hormonal havoc, having to navigate what needs to be done, without then the additional stress of feeling you've got to look a certain way. I think we really need to, as mums and as women, give ourselves more credit in terms
Mm.
of how amazing the body is.
Oh, I cannot agree
Um,
more.
yeah.
Mm. And it's professionals like ourselves and many, many others I know who are changing the narrative around that now, and talking about health and fitness and nutrition in a very different way. And I'd like to say that we're making progress, and I think sometimes we do. And then sometimes you'll see something else, and you want to bang your head against the wall. It's like, oh, we're not. Like there's still idiots out there talking about BMI and bouncing back. But I think it's so important for professionals like ourselves to keep repeating the message and keep spreading the word and talking about what we're talking about, because you've just got to keep doing it and doing podcasts like this.
Yeah, you do. Um, I think just on your, maybe that's something we should also just chat about, is fueling your body, and what does that mean,
Mm,
for a mum, and looking at it from even before you become a mum. How do we actually make sense of that? Because
mm,
it is about fueling your body, and learning how to listen to your body as well. Because unfortunately, when you get all these other influences, you can drown, that can sort of drown out your
mm,
natural ability to think, well, this doesn't feel right, or I don't have any energy. Don't feel like I'm gaining in strength, or I'm not able to exercise
mm,
more. So, it's really important that we think about how we feel our bodies in that way, and know that when we focus on, again, the numbers. So do we focus on, this is my other bugbear, calories? Why are we focusing on calories? What does
mm,
that mean for us? Those numbers, it's got absolutely no gauge for you in terms of what that is doing in terms of nourishing your body. So calories are different. You can have two foods that offer 100 calories per, say, 20 grams, and that might be a handful of nuts, and it might be a, Macca's burger. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking of a few ideas, right? Um, what does that mean for your body? They work so differently in terms of what that'll ultimately do to nourish your body. So again, thinking of food in terms of a number or of a calorie, we don't eat calories. We've got to think about what we can do to really find that better balance and feel like we're not denuding our bodies of anything. Um, and I guess, when we think of motherhood, so I've divided it, and I guess this is where the whole simple steps concept has come from, into really 5 simple steps, because they each have got their own focus, whether it's for mum or for baby or for both. And so the first step is around preconception nutrition, and fertility nutrition, and really setting your body up and starting that process of making sure that you aren't starting your pregnancy in a denuded state, in a sense, that you kind of tick those boxes, and you really are improving the quality of what you're eating, and focusing on those things that you can improve on, being a little bit more physically active, maybe getting a little bit more sleep. So allowing yourself that opportunity before the craziness of pregnancy starts. And we know, yeah, before you don't have that extra time. And we know that when we're talking about fertility, nutrition plays a huge role in supporting fertility for men and women. So that's really important. And we need to make sure that we just ticking a few boxes, and it's simple things, right? To make sure that they are things you can put into practice every day. And then we enter pregnancy, and pregnancy is overwhelming because you are inundated with new things in your feed, first of all.
Yeah.
But in terms of what you suddenly can't eat, and it's always the focus is on can't,
Yeah.
food safety, and you've got side effects as well. So you're feeling a bit rubbish, you're nauseous, you don't really know, you can't hold much down anyway. So what does that mean for you and for your growing baby? So I think mums then entered this phase with quite a bit of additional overwhelm, because they really now want to be the best mum. They know that food has a role to play in nourishing their baby. And so again, it becomes quite confusing. And each trimester has got its specific requirements. So when we talk about fetal development and brain development, and then laying that foundation for your growing baby, it differs from the first trimester to the second and the third. So again, mums, we need to support them in finding what it is that they can eat, and help them with that. And then postpartum, as you said before, it's all about recovery, all about healing, and all about helping mum in terms of establishing a really good feeding space with her baby. And then we've got stage 4 and 5, which maybe is a little bit more focused on baby, because that's kind of introducing solids. And then 5 is more transitioning to family meals. But mom's role is always first and foremost in all of these phases, or stages. And knowing that, and this is, I guess, where that first 1,000 days comes into play. And so the first 1,000 days is from the time of conception to a child's second birthday. And we know that it's probably one of the most important stages in a child's physical, cognitive, emotional development, behavioral development, but also immune development. And mums also, their immunity plays a role as well, and can be impacted over this time. Yeah, so it's just really important that we support mums in all these different phases.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just knowing what to focus on, like you said, keeping it simple and listening to the right information from the right people.
Yeah, so mums, I mean, mums, when we look at some of the studies that have been done in Australia, it is quite interesting to see how mums are going.
Mm.
Because about 2/3 of mums believe that they are eating what they should when
Mm.
they are pregnant. And when we look at what that actually translates into, um, the most recent study showed that less than 1% of mums are actually meeting the key pregnancy nutrients
Really?
from food.
Wow.
So
Did
mums
it
are,
say why that is in the study? Did it say why?
um, so
I
I
think you'll
think
just guess.
there's a lot of things that confound it. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot
Mhm.
of stress.
Yeah.
That's leading to moms maybe not making choices that they should be making.
Mhm.
Um, Misinformation
Mm.
was one of them as well. And then just general, I guess adding on from what we know, Australian adults as a whole eat or don't eat. We know that,
Mm.
a lot of Australians, only a third are really meeting what they should eat in terms of fruit.
Mm.
Less than 25% are eating what they should in terms of vegetables. And so, I guess when we look at what Australians as a whole are eating and then we translate it into pregnant mums, it
Mm.
probably does make sense.
It follows that
Um,
trend.
it does follow that trend, but knowing that pregnancy obviously increases your requirements significantly in key nutrients, we need to really help mums to support them better, because the majority are entering pregnancy with a lack of diversity and variety
Mm.
and in a depleted state. And so when you enter pregnancy in depleted state, you will absolutely leave pregnancy
Yeah.
in an even more depleted state.
Mm. Oh my goodness. Um, so Gina, what is your advice for mums out there? Mums listening, mums everywhere. What's your advice in trying to look after their health whilst navigating all this poor advice on social media platforms and everywhere else that we've talked about?
I think, if I can, in one sentence, I'd love to ask moms to just make the shift from this all or nothing mentality
Mm,
and striving for perfection.
yeah.
Um, we've got to move away from focusing on the numbers, um, and rather look at other ways to measure our health. So listen to how our body feels, you know, look at things like physical activity, energy levels, mood.
Mm,
Um, when we focus on our health and on variety, what we tend to see is that we start feeling better, but also things like our gut health is supported. And
mm.
we haven't even spoken about gut health, but
No,
it
this
is,
is a whole new podcast
it's
episode.
a whole other podcast. But we know the vital role it plays in our metabolism, our immunity, our mental well-being, our mental health,
Mm,
um, and then also setting your child's immunity up as well. But it is so important. And so, simple guidelines.
mhm,
Firstly, nourish. So if moms can rather focus on what they can do, just nourishing their body, nourishing their mind, nourishing
mhm.
their soul, um, without focusing on the weight, that's going to be important. Yeah.
Awesome. Mhm,
Um, Secondly, would be variety and balance. So move away from this, again, all or nothing restriction way of thinking.
mhm,
eat in color. So when we talk about having, regular balanced meals, what does that mean? We want to make sure that I always like to tell my clients, look at what does a balanced plate look like. So have a variety of fruit and veg giving you color. Focus on whole grains, really good quality protein, and some healthy fats. So a little bit of everything to get to that balance and to get to that variety. Because when we do that, we really do support our bodies in the best way possible. And in doing that, we also support our kids, right? And then enjoy. I think, this kind of also alludes to the not restricting. Food has to be enjoyed. If we don't enjoy our food, we lose that amazing relationship that we should develop with food. Acknowledge that it's neither good nor bad. There's no wonder food, but all food in balance and in moderation is wonderful. So we've got to try and move away from that. And then the fourth one would probably be for me, and I don't really need to say this to you, but physical activity. So yeah, we know how important just moving is for your well-being. And that doesn't have to be anything major. It can be just that 10 minutes that you've been able to go outside and just have a walk, or just be in nature for a bit. So keeping it really simple again. So yeah, I think that would be my few takeouts for mums.
I 100% agree with all of those. I love them, and they're so simple. And what I loved is that you didn't say don't do this, don't consume this, don't add this to your diet, don't take, or saying take this out. There was none of that. It's like, what can you add? You can add color, you can add fruit, veggies, good quality protein. It's like, what can you add? No mention of cutting out chocolate, cutting out chippies,
No.
any of that. It's like, what can you add? And I love telling my clients that as well. It's like, don't worry about what you're trying to take out and what you're going to stop eating. It's like, what can you add to that plate? And then eat whatever you're going to eat as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Such good advice. Gina, I literally feel we could have a podcast episode for each of those 5 points that you just finished on. But maybe I'll invite you back because it would be good to talk more about everything. But if people wanted to contact you for help or advice, or just looking into, how you can support them, how can they find you? Instagram, Facebook, website, how can they find you?
So yeah, I've got a website. So it's www.simplestepsnutrition.com.au. You can follow me on Insta as well, and Facebook, and maybe there'll be a couple of tidbits and some nice menu recipes and snack
I've
ideas.
seen some of your snack ideas and stuff recently. I'm like, oh, save. It's so good.
So yeah, it'd be lovely if you reach out in socials, even though we're talking about social media.
It can be used for so much good.
It
It's just
can be
a
used
shame
for
that
so
there's
much
so
good.
much nonsense on
Yeah,
there as well.
exactly. And then, yeah, you're welcome to email me as well. But I guess for anyone not knowing where I can help and support them, I give anyone a 15-minute complimentary clarity call, because I think it is often that thing where, again, you might be seeing other health professionals, or you might even not know that you need support. And to be honest, you might not need a lot of support, but it might just be a pointer in the right direction. So if anyone's unsure, they are welcome to give me a call, and yeah, book in a clarity call just to get some guidance as to how I might support them in their journey.
Amazing. And is that information on your website? There's an
It
option
is. It
to
is.
book a
Yeah.
call.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Gina, thank you so much for talking today. I wasn't sure how long this podcast episode would be, but I feel like it could almost be double that. So thank
I
you.
know.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome.
It's been so lovely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I've learnt heaps as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Louise.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard, make sure you hit follow wherever you listen to your podcasts, rate and review so that more mums can start to challenge societal norms when it comes to what their body should look like. For further information on what I've covered in this episode or to connect with me in person, head to the link in the show notes. You'll also find the link to enroll in my online course, The Body Resilient Mum Project. Until next time, bye for now.